This NIL era has completely decimated the collegiate football experience that a lot of us had growing up. But the NIL killing college football and college football killing your program due to lack of NIL are entirely two different things.
You are Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma State Cowboys, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, y'all, and hello, all. Welcome back to Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily stop for all things Cowboy and Cowgirl related. My name is Cody Stovall. I want to thank you kindly for stopping by to make this your first listen. We're available on all of your podcasting platforms, visually as well on YouTube. Find me personally on the X at All Day O State. Today, we're partially brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. There's not a better way to experience everything than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 back in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. Meanwhile, we get started in the conversation that has been drummed up by Oklahoma State Athletic Director Chad Weiberg. In the collegiate football game that we all grew up with, part of the allure was seeing somebody come from high school, especially in Oklahoma high school, and see them develop as a freshman and play a little bit as a sophomore, and it just keeps expanding. Well, that personal connection is gone for the most part because guys staying at one spot for 4, 5, 6 years is likely not going to happen. Plus, we don't have the COVID thing to kind of lean back on for extra years anyways. This has become a fast track for anybody to get some semblance of playing time if you're not happy for whatever reason. Now, that has nothing to do, for the most part, with NIL. And Chad Weiberg has recently mentioned that there could be some obstacles. He talked about how there's multiple times in the history of collegiate football where there's been era-defining moments that cause people to capitalize on them or fall by the wayside. One of those he mentioned was right after World War II, and you could easily see that Oklahoma State was really far back in developing and spending on football. Back in the day, baseball and wrestling were far bigger sports that had a far more national audience. Therefore, that's where a lot of the dollar bills were being geared towards. And we were pretty late to the program. I don't think there's any denying that. Whenever we did get some uptick in production, we found a way to shoot ourselves in the foot and ended up in probation after the Hartley Dykes and Barry Sanders and Thurman Thomas era, which took us a while to combat. As an Oklahoma State fan, we now hear these conversations about NIL. And as it directly pertains to us as a fan base, a lot of us did find a way to come together without having bukus of dollar bills like donors do. But $5, $10, $100, $200 here and there, it added up. And it was good enough to keep guys like Ollie Gordon and Deshaun Stribling and all of the offensive line and Alan Bowman stayed in Stillwater, America, not to mention your Colin Olivers and your Nick Martins and your Trey Ruckers. All of those dudes found a way to stay at Oklahoma State, and partially due to the NIL budget. As Chad Weiberg just mentioned, though, you could find yourselves in an area where you're playing catch up for the next decade plus if you're not able to get ahead of this. So where does Oklahoma State stand right now? Well, according to On3, CBS, NBC, a lot of publications, when they put out their top 50, top 75 of NIL schools, Oklahoma State is typically around the 45, 46, 44, 47 range, which means we're right at that cut line of being in the top 50 cool kid club. And if you listen to Mark Emmert, the former NCAA president, talk about how that's basically how this next round of realignment could potentially be, is the top 50 schools in the country, maybe top 40, 45. Regardless of what the number is, Oklahoma State is teetering right on that line. And if you look at the NIL-NCAA.com figures, in 2023, Oklahoma State was towards the bottom of the pack when it came to NIL. And as it sits, projections for 2025 were in 9th place. Now, that number doesn't really mean as much because there's going to be some schools like TCU and BYU and Baylor that don't have to report the same as your regularly public available type of universities. But whenever you're seeing teams like Iowa State and West Virginia and Kansas spend more than Oklahoma State, that should be a problem. all of this money that's floating around Texas Tech, okay, they got some oil tycoons that have that kind of money. Okay, I get it. Well, Iowa State, do they have the same oil tycoons? Probably not, yet here they are spending more than we are in NIL. So as much as I do think that Chad Weiberg needs to address the fan base and let everybody know that you could slide backwards in this era and you need to be competitive and you need to find ways to be more competitive, I feel like this is a two-way street because Mike Gundy has been very reluctant to embrace this. That's one of the reasons that we are where we are. Not to mention this roster turnover and how beneficial it's going to be, which we're going to talk about in segment 2. These are some things that allow us to get excited again about NIL because after you did pay all of the Ollie Gordons and the Alan Bowmans and the John Striblings and Nick Martins, we had our worst season ever under Mike Gundy. And even going back to 1994 was the last time we went over in conference play. So it's almost impossible to just erase that and convince people to give more money. There's got to be some give and take in this relationship, in my personal opinion. If you're going to give more, it has to be through some semblance of a sales pitch. Part of the sales pitch is obviously going to be the fact that we've completely overhauled basically both sides of the ball. And now you've got guys like Jules Montanar and Todd Grantham and Doug Meacham that are bringing a lot of heavy hitters in from the transfer portal that also are going to allow us to get more excited, just like the spring game or some semblance of a spring game with 30-minute sessions in between or before and after for the meet the team and all that fun stuff. But regardless of what that looks like, to me, it has to be a spring game. Again, if you're trying to build up the anticipation and you're trying to get Oklahoma State fans to pull out of their pockets once again, you're going to have to give something. And this conversational piece about Oklahoma State potentially going further and further away, it's only problematic to me because we put ourselves in this position. Now here we are trying to play catch up. So it's precisely what Chad Weiberg was saying that we needed to try to avoid. Well, we're already in it. We're already playing catch up. And now you have to convince a bunch of people that did pay last year to pay even more so this year without having a lot of sales pitch behind it. So as Oklahoma State is asking for more, I think we need to be supplied with more. And part of that is growing the national fan base. To me, this is the most instrumental moment for Chad Weiberg and everybody else in that football office to expand the capabilities for NIL. Part of that is obviously just going to be from a media perspective. You have to be able to sell something. You have to give everybody in the fan base and the donors reasons to get excited. And again, the coaching staff overhaul is going to do a decent amount of that. The transfer portal guys that we've brought in is going to do a decent amount of that. Not retaining an overabundance of this particular roster, that's going to do some of that. Just making it known that we could find ourselves in a very precarious situation if we don't get more involved now. That's all good and well. What is not good and well is you can't have a 3-9 season. You can't allow the head man to back himself into a corner and give everybody the double birds and refuse to fire anybody, adjust anybody, move anybody until it went completely tatas up. So I understand that Chad Weiberg is preaching to everybody in Oklahoma State fan base that this is a critical junction in our potential history. But I have a little bit of a problem with it because we put ourselves in this position. We didn't capitalize like we should have off of the We Have a Logo 2 season. Complacency and laziness has been a storyline feature for a couple of the last 3 years now, and we chose not to address it. Just like we chose not to address the fact that Mike Gundy didn't love the NIL, he didn't love the transfer portal. None of us loved it, but some coaches were far more embracing of it, and that's probably why they're playing less catch-up. This revenue sharing thing, it might be a whole conversation in and of itself. But as it sits right now, Oklahoma State would be safe. And the revenue sharing is important to this conversation because you cannot have another 3-win season or 4 or 5-win season. If Oklahoma State is 44, 45th, 46th, right around that range in NIL right now, if we have another lackluster season, then you're having the legitimate conversation of us going backwards and us spending the next decade trying to play catch up. So although I feel Chad Weiberg is making the right statements, It's hard to have a lot of empathy or sympathy whenever we put ourselves in this position. And we decided to back the horses that put us in this position. And yet we have a difficulty coming up with the same dollar bills as Iowa State and Texas Tech and Kansas. Like, that just doesn't compute. It doesn't make sense. So there's other factors here that are limiting our donor base. Am I saying we have a massive donor base with lots of dollar bills? No. But I hate the fact that we're now almost begging for people to come out of the woodwork when we were our own worst enemy here. We should have made this switch a couple years ago. We should have found a way to make this more important to not only the university, but Mike Gundy, and make it integral into part of the recruiting pitches, but we didn't do that. So we're already playing catch up. So him saying that if we don't spend more for season tickets and spend more at the gate and spend more here and there, then we're going to keep having a difficult time. We put ourselves here, Mr. Chad Weiberg. So we can dig ourselves out, but part of that has got to be building the anticipation, giving us more connections, more stories, more availability. And honestly, just having more candid answers from not only Mike Gundy, but from some of the other staff as well. This is a crucial time for Oklahoma State. Chad Weiberg is right. We have to get our money right to continue to matriculate up in the Big 12 standings to put ourselves at the right footing for the next round of realignment, which is pretty inevitable if you ask me. It's going to come. It's going to get broken down to whether it's 2 divisions, two conferences, 3 conferences, but you have to have a certain amount of money before you are eligible, whatever the case may be. We are teetering at the very back end of this ordeal. Right now, I would say we're kind of safe. But another season like this, and we're not. If we keep keeping everything close to the vest in a little bitty box inside Stillwater America, we cannot complain when our NIL dollars aren't competitive with everybody else's. We have to do more, to sell ourselves, to get people more involved. And that, to me, is a little bit different than just saying, hey, we need more money. Okay, cool. Duh. We know that. But why and how? What are the reasons other than sliding backwards, which was our own doing, unfortunately? But you don't need to be sliding backwards, especially when it comes to your finances. TurboTax is here for you because taxes was the waiting, wondering, worrying phase of life that you don't have to stress about as much anymore. With all the waiting, worrying, and wondering, now you have taxes very easily squared away when you get matched with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes the undivided attention that they work to create the biggest return possible for you, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your daily activities. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. There's no waiting, no wondering, no worrying when you have TurboTax. This is taxes done right. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. This is only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Make sure you go to TurboTax.com. Don't allow your taxes to be part of your stress. Relieve that stress with TurboTax today. So now we get to talk a little bit about the conversations that Mike Gundy has had in regards to Todd Grantham and Doug Meacham, even to some degree. He talked about, how he wanted to have a head coach on the defensive side of the ball. That's what he got in Todd Grantham. He wanted to have something similar on the offensive side of the ball, which is why he brought in Doug Meacham. And as we've seen, most of these dudes have brought in a lot of their own staffs, which leads me to the kind of feeling bad for Nardo thing. Congratulations. Coach Nardo did find a spot at Charlotte, and he did have some other opportunities as defensive coordinator. But once the cat was out of the bag, that Mike Gundy had Bryan Nardo change some of his defense, other places were like, hey, we want you to come here, be the DC, but you have to change your defense. Bryan Nardo still believes in his version of the 3-3-5, and he believes that he can get the technical training possible to enhance his career once again. So after he leaves Charlotte, hopefully he gets another DC opportunity under his defense. But one thing this did highlight for me is the fact that Todd Grantham brought in 99.99999% of his own staff. Doug Meacham brought in probably close to 90% of his own staff as well. There's going to be a couple of holdovers, but not all that many. And even some of the guys that we thought would be holdovers, like Coach Hammerschmidt and Coach Wozniak, they're not here anymore either. So how is it that we understand the lay of the land now, but we didn't last year? Again, this is part of my we need NIL dollar bills being a little bit too late in preaching to the choir whenever we put ourselves in this position. And as much as the browbeating has been done on Bryan Nardo, statistically speaking, he deserves every amount of shade that is thrown his way. But it also goes back to we asked him to come into an almost impossible situation. Now, granted, him going from a much smaller level to a massive Power 4 opportunity, of course, having some continuity in the coaching staff we thought was going to be massively beneficial for Bryan Nardo, and perhaps it could have been, but it didn't work out. And it probably didn't work out because he didn't have dudes to implement his system. So he's trying to get guys that have been here for a decade, 8 years, 12 years, 14 years, teach them what he's trying to do, knowing all while they're going to have some pushback because that's not how we do things at Oklahoma State. And this is this, that, and the other. And unfortunately, Bryan Nardo got pulled in so many different directions by so many different people. It equaled the outcome that we saw in this previous season. It's not justifiable for him keeping his job. I think he should have been demoted as opposed to let go, but you could have said the same thing about Hammerschmidt and Wozniak as well. This idea that Bryan Nardo was going to be able to come in with 25 coaches that have been here for a decade plus, it was really good in theory. But in practical thinking, there's a reason coaches bring in their staffs. And it's not only because of terminology, it's understanding of what they do on the recruiting trail. What are some of the pitches, some of the things that they say? What are they like in meeting with the families? What are they like in having disagreements with some of the other coaches? Do they work well together? Are they somebody that's going to be, pushed in the corner, or are they going to voice their opinion? These are all things that coaches or coordinators dictate whenever they do make a move. So as much as I do kind of feel bad for Nardo getting put in a position where he had to teach a bunch of old school guys his methodology, knowing that some of those dudes didn't like it to begin with. Some of them did not agree with the 3-3-5. Some of them didn't agree with the system as a whole. But now we get to see that shift that you're supposed to get. When you bring in a coordinator, he's supposed to bring in his dudes. And for that, I feel very happy. And I think we all should as well, because we're operating now like a little bit of a big boy program. Now, don't get me wrong. I did sit here hooting and hollering about one of the reasons that Oklahoma State and Utah were going to be at the top of the Big 12 was because of the continuity in coaching, right? But turns out continuity ended up getting replaced by that fun word complacency, and complacency equaled laziness. And that was very, very, very evident on the field. Now, why the lazy people kept getting playing time and kept getting to start, that is a topic of a discussion that hopefully comes out in Mike Gundy's book at some point in time in life. But as much as maybe Bryan Nardo did not get the benefit of the doubt in bringing in his own staff and guys to implement his plan and do some of the conditioning and strength and technique training his way, we're not going to have that problem anymore, especially on the defensive side of the ball. That's been pretty much set in stone. Todd Grantham is the head coach of the defense. Now, in theory, Doug Meacham is the head coach of the offense. We all know that might be a little more tricky to pull off. But at the end of the day, I think this is a great move for Oklahoma State. I did think Bryan Nardo was going to be fantastic with the returning coaching, but it ended up being square peg in a round hole. So it is what it is. But here we are now. And now we're doing it the right way. And that is yet another reason why I do think some of this NIL conversation can be fruitful at the end of the day, because we made moves. Maybe they are a year, 2, 3 too late. Like, you could make the argument that Casey Dunn should not have been here for years. You could say the same thing about Jason McIndoe. You could say the same thing to some degree about Charlie Dickey. You could say the same thing to some degree about Tim Duffy, especially after this previous season. I think this is wonderful for Oklahoma State. My only reservation is, are we a couple years too late? As Chad Weiberg is breaking it down, how we could easily find ourselves playing catch up for the next decade. My question is, have we already put ourselves in a very bad spot for that to be in order right away? This is a huge season. Every season's big, of course, I get that. But not every school's teetering on that top 50 line. Not every school's hovering around 45, 46, 44. So if you have another 3-win season, all of this stuff that Chad Weiberg is hoping for, it more or less goes out the window. You lose more and more credibility. I feel like that is some of the issue. Just like you're going to have some of the biggest donors we have not want to donate without Mike Gundy there, you do have a decent number of donors that don't want to donate with Mike Gundy there, right? So there's some things that we need to get resolved. And part of it is just open, upfront, honest, transparent conversations from the head man himself. We need more interviews. We need more Pat McAfee stuff. We need more access. We need more relatability. If you're trying to build up the NIL and you now have a coaching staff that has come in to do it the right way and rebuild all across the board to bring in all of their guys who understand everything that they're going to do from an implementation standpoint, that's stuff that we should be selling. Just like I don't think we marketed Ollie Gordon whatsoever for a Heisman campaign before the season started. There's a campaign here, right? We need to kick it off. I think spring game is part of it. These long form press conferences are really, really solid. But we've got a long way to go. I definitely do like the coaches, though. And I like the idea of the coaches doing their own thing, running their own ship, and building their own success to have their own futures. Speaking of success, we are still undefeated in wrestling. Ladies and gentlemen, we are undefeated in wrestling, but you can be undefeated starting a new day, a new dawn, a new year with FanDuel, because Super Bowl 59 is going to be your opportunity to get back in the winnings category. One game, two teams, endless possibilities for your pocketbook. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or betting on the coin flip, whatever, FanDuel makes it easy for you to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. Live betting is the bee's knees, and you need to take this opportunity knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 back in bonus bets for the Super Bowl. That's the icing on the cake for you. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 back in bonus bets by going to FanDuel.com. Make sure that you go to FanDuel.com and bet with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 59 and the NFL. So wrestling is still yet undefeated, but that delineation between the haves and the have-nots, it's becoming a little bit more muddy, okay? I made a comment that there's a massive jump between Penn State and then Iowa, Oklahoma State, and then everybody else. Because we were beating top 5 teams like they were redheaded stepchildren going out of style. But that has changed recently. Yes, we did face the number 5 team in the country in Northern Iowa, followed by the reigning Big 12 champs in Iowa State, names Iowa. The trip to Iowa, we won, but are we starting to hit a wall? That's the question. And this was very reminiscent of last season under John Smith. The first 3 quarters of the year, we were just beating the tar out of everybody, and it looked like we were going to have enough potential to have a top 3, top 5 style of run in the Nationals. But in the end of the season, we kind of started tailing off. Big 12s, we obviously tailed off fairly significantly. And then we go to nationals, and we just did not have a great go of it for the most part. And that's kind of happening the same way now. I had a buddy who travels some of the 7-on-7 circuit with me. He's a photographer. His son plays defensive tackle at KU. And he texted me last night. And he's like, hey, man, I got Hulu Live, and I turned this thing on to see you guys losing to Iowa State. And I said, we're pretty good at 125. From 133 to 157 is a crapshoot. 165 is Cam Amin, who's supposed to be really good, but I'm 50-50 on him half the time. But from 165 to heavyweight, that is where we make our money. That's where we make our hay. And that's how it transpired, thankfully. But from 133 to 165, that's a decent chunk. And that's very, very problematic for us, even competing for that number 2 spot with Iowa. Now that duel against Iowa looks a little bit more sketchy. If I'd have said 2 weeks ago we beat Iowa by 6, now I'm saying we might beat Iowa by like 1. And that might be the homer in me. I'm drinking a bunch of orange Kool-Aid. But it does make you wonder, as we get this late in the season, are we going to still have enough in the tank to win a Big 12 title? We still have to face another big-time university, number 23 ranked Mizzou. We still have to go through the Big 12 tournament. There's still a lot of epic matches that are yet to come. But do you think there could be some validity in the fact that we're kind of hitting that wall? Or was just the front half of the schedule so easy? Because that's the perplexing thing. We're beating top 5, top 9, top 10 teams, 34-3, 32-6, 31-4. We're beating the tar out of people. And that has slowed down. Now, I know the competition has increased, but is anybody else finding this weight 133 through 165 a problem? And is it a problem that we can overcome? Are there some guys mixed in there that are good enough to make some crazy things happen? I think so. But the hit and miss is a little troublesome. The battle for second place is still there, but I'm wondering if maybe we didn't have some fool's gold the first half of the season. If we weren't beating the tar out of people, and you're talking major decision, tech fall, pin, tech fall, major decision over and over and over and over. So even some of the ones that we're winning are pretty close. I don't know. I felt like it was going to be easy peasy battle for number 2 between us and Iowa. I don't know if that's the case anymore. I mean, it still is from a points perspective, but the NCAAs are a little bit different. Should I be concerned, or is this just part of the gig and part of the season, and we still got enough big duels ahead of us that it should be fine? Is having a lot of these close matches or losing a lot of these matches at these weights, could that eventually be good for us? I don't know. You guys will let me know down in the comment section for all of you out here on the YouTube country. So we're going to have this one right here. As always, you know I love you. God bless. Go Pokes. Thank you for tuning in to make this your first listen here in Locked On Oklahoma State. You could be anywhere. So happy you choose to be here. Like it if you like the daggone hang. Dislike if you don't. That's okay too. More importantly, share, comment, and subscribe. My podcast people out there, you're the bricks, the bread, the butter, the fountain, the fondue. You're all of it. Do what you do. Hit the stars. Leave a review. All righty, y'all. Later, my taters.